The Galactic warriors had conquered advanced civilizations, tamed sophisticated life forms, and seen innumerable planets. They subjugated innumerable worlds to them. Earth was but a stop. Word had gotten around that humans were a primitive race, which was another obstacle they would easily conquer. Their wealth, technology, and weapons were insignificant on a backwater planet full of this was the dominant mindset, and they sneered at creatures that barely made ends meet using simple tools and antiquated weapons. The Galactic generals and their advisors scoffed at the notion that humans could actually pose a threat, when one of them sneered when they first heard about human tactics being used for camouflage. To the Galactic warriors, who possessed detection devices and scanners capable of penetrating thick forests and identifying, after all, life signs from orbit, revealed that human camouflage was a clumsy farce. Depended on technology far more than the sleazy tactics of concealing themselves behind bushes or blending in with the shadows they came from. Location, where all living forms could be monitored and all environments could be charted, but as they read for there when it came time to descend from their mission, nobody questioned for a moment that humans would be readily subdued. Enormous ships that hummed with electricity, their armor shining, and their guns to the cutting-edge technologies they were using. They marched with confidence and poise, ahead anticipating that their very presence would arouse terror. But as they touched down amid the Earth's forests, plains, and deserts, was a strange silence. The cities were deserted, and the forest appeared to be quiet. The Galactic warriors encountered no adversaries beforehand and no lines of defense. Considering that the locals had just left knowing they couldn't win, this is more evidence of human inferiority. They moved forward, scanning the area with their scanners, and each reading confirmed that nothing out of the ordinary was happening. At first, they were merely trees, grass, sand, and stone, but they confidently spread through a variety of environments, including expansive urban landscapes and thick woods. But as they traveled, there was an eerie impression started to spread across the ranks. And several of them claimed to have heard odd noises, such as branches breaking, light rustling, and sporadic shadow shifting. The warriors looked at one another from behind a building or tree, each attempting to shake off the idea that it was stupid because they knew there were no animals in the area. To be dangerous, but there was nevertheless a sense of dread that quickly dispersed the gathering. Of Galactic warriors started to see an odd occurrence occasionally. It seemed as though someone had died. They would swing their weapons around until they were close enough to touch without leaving any trace, prepared to attack, but would discover nothing because they couldn't understand how. How could someone or something be hidden and invisible to their scanners if there was movement that they missed? Even while these incidents were initially disregarded, they eventually became too common despite the galaxy's best supervision. To disregard over time, the Galactic leaders became agitated and asked explanations, directed their men to search the entire area more thoroughly, but regardless of how thorough the search results, nothing changed save for the sporadic flash in their assurance was now flavored with the shadow's smallest movement before they vanished. They had been told that this mission would be as easy as Earth's, therefore they were annoyed and perplexed by what was happening here. Their mechanical brilliance was unmatched by primordial life forms, but gradually bewilderment gave way to something. The Galactic warriors established camps as night fell in the hopes of regrouping and planning, but as the sun sank below the horizon, the scenery changed and the shadows became more pronounced, merging with the surroundings in ways that their technology was unable to penetrate. The gloom, making every shadow and rustle more noticeable, appeared to be living. And some warriors began to experience the first pricks of fear, a feeling that was unfamiliar to them, for reports filtered back to command, and throughout all their conquests, they had never encountered an adversary they couldn't see or locate. From enemy sightings of small patrols that had strayed too far from the main group, they asserted that some people swore they had seen a human, but no one could provide evidence, just for it to disappear without leaving any trace. Other people saw brief glimpses of figures that were gone before anybody else could confirm that these warriors, who had spent their entire lives training to defeat their enemies. Galactic generals attempted to keep the peace, but they were unsettled by an opponent who refused to reveal itself. Reassuring their soldiers of their technological superiority, weaponry might, and extensive experience, they told them that the people of Earth were weak, and that whatever they had gained from innumerable other worlds, what we were seeing was only a coincidence, an anomaly that will be fixed shortly. They increased the number of patrol members, doubled down on scanning and observation. But as the hours passed, the unease simply intensified. The cosmic warrior's armor created to inform people started to feel like a burden that made them stand out from the natural background. Their formerly triumphant march had turned wary, with each warrior on high alert, watching over their shoulders. Some of the younger men, whose nerves were starting to fray, started whispering to one another about the back at their base. Their scanners were unable to identify the specters, invisible humans that lurked in the trees. Commanders became enraged and, believing they could manage the situation, ordered their best soldiers to advance. Task. But when these seasoned warriors went out, they also came back with the same disturbing information. They couldn't get rid of the sensation that they were being followed into a trap by invisible eyes. Enemies who had a deeper understanding of the area than they did distilled their frustration into something else. A pervasive worry started to creep in among the Galactic warriors because of something that hadn't touched their hearts in ages. Realized that they were accustomed to controlling and overwhelming their opponents they had never come across, and it was as though the planet itself was concealing its defenders, protecting them from the adversary they couldn't see or detect. When the invaders finally realized that human concealment took more than simply hiding behind foliage or dressing in background blending apparel. It was a skill developed over generations of survival and an innate instinct that was woven into the very fabric of Earth. With all of their technology, the cosmic warriors were in a realm as humanity. They were unable to stop the Galactic warriors, who moved forward with the belief that they would soon find and face any human. Resistance. Their superiors shouted commands to put an immediate stop to what they were doing, and their scanners scanned the ground. It to be a fruitless hunt, but as they went farther and the eerie silence surrounding them only intensified, they anticipated encountering in lines of human soldiers waiting in open defiance, facing the enemy rather. They discovered silent forests, desolate neighborhoods, and vacant fields. It was inconceivable that a planet that appeared to be undefended would be so silent in the face of an attack. Their confidence started to reveal cracks as news of weird, inexplicable events involving soldiers in shadows would shift too swiftly for the sight to follow, according to the Vanguard. And when they turned around, they felt the enemy's presence in every shadowy tree line and dark corner, but they couldn't find any indication of it. Patrols went farther in the hopes of being the first to apprehend a fugitive adversary, but these soldiers came back. Disappointed that they could only describe seeing ephemeral entities that appeared and vanished as soon as they were in sight, they encountered stillness instead of an open challenge or physical altercation. The rank's initial annoyance was starting to give way to uncertainty about the cosmic warriors. Their strategy was straightforward. They were accustomed to using intimidation and their overwhelming technological supremacy to conquer worlds. Shown strength overpowered by force and ensured earthly compliance. They would use the same formula, but in reality, they were up against an adversary they was unable to observe or completely understand. Every shadow report, every fake the longer they moved without an obvious engagement. The more the stress increased as they heard every unexplained sound. As dusk drew near, quiet itself turned into a type of resistance that disturbed their sense of control. Because they had become cautious about pushing farther into uncharted territory, commanders gave the orders for the men to establish defensive positions. Raging without being aware of the enemy's strategy, hoping that by retaining their position, they would eventually humans pressuring them into direct conflict. But as night fell, the humans didn't show up. Because their armor shined in the daylight, warriors found themselves more vulnerable than before. The shadows appeared to grow in the low light, concealing every gap and filling the cosmic forces line of sight. Sophisticated equipment made to scan, and in these circumstances, lights that typically illuminated even the darkest landscapes became less effective. Clear rays appeared to flicker in the growing gloom, according to reports from warriors stationed at different locations. Felt vulnerable and aware that invisible eyes were watching them from all sides. Thick with an eerie stillness that caused even the most experienced warriors to lose their calm in the face of the invisible enemy didn't have to launch a direct assault. Its veiled presence and silence had already started to hours past while they tried to mentally disarm them. And tension among the warriors replaced their frustration. Who used to make fun of the people of Earth were now terrified by the simplicity of the human strategies. These were not sophisticated tactics, but rather a deep comprehension of the geography of light and patience as shadow that the Galactic warriors had never met. They had always regarded dominance through direct battle as important. Overwhelming force on Earth. They encountered a form of conflict that appeared nearly archaic, but was incredibly efficient tactic developed over millennia of surviving on a planet with a variety of terrains and ecosystems. A small patrol that had traveled beyond the main base reported that they had seen movement. But it wasn't a distinct sighting, more akin to the indication of a presence, a figure that appeared to blend in with the environment as. The warriors in the main camp listened in confusion as soon as it was detected. Even though they had equipment that could detect life forms miles away, humanity were nevertheless able to avoid detection on this primitive planet. Their sensors, how could such feats be managed for the first time by a species so primitive? Over time, a glimmer of doubt started to cast a shadow over even the most senior officials' thoughts. Beyond a tactical failure, this circumstance was beginning to resemble a test of their own convictions. They had come to Earth with complete confidence in their own dominance. But now they had to contend with a species whose existence felt elusive, as though it were woven into the terrain they were unable to comprehend how or why. But the humans' capacity for concealment was there was a slight change in their spirits as they recognized that brute force wasn't sufficient in this situation. They required something greater comprehension of the environment and the creatures they encountered. As dawn drew near, the Galactic warriors prepared for yet another day of searching. And their ranks were now tense, as though in every scan that produced no results added to the creeping feeling that an invisible force was eroding their morale. Annoyance every time they heard about a movement that proved to be nothing, which increased their doubts about. Their long-used technology appeared to be nearly ineffective against the species that had mastered the galactic leaders, increasing invisibility in their own surroundings. Desperate, they stepped up their orders, directing more patrols and scans. Exact searches. But it became increasingly evident every hour that these guys weren't facing the conventional enemy, preferring to remain hidden and wait for the Galactic to confront them, rather to engage in open combat. It seemed as though the humans knew that time would ultimately be on their side as the warriors exhausted themselves in their pursuit. With every second that went by, the galactic forces became more and more involved in an unseen conflict with an adversary that consistently exceeded their expectations. Earth's defenders, while invisible, had successfully used time and silence as their tools to transform the very terrain into a weapon. The once confident galactic warriors were starting to realize that this conquest would not be readily obtained if the galactic warriors persisted in their attempts to adapt, exasperated by the continuous, unspoken opposition they were unable to fully understand. They used their elite squads, equipped with the best tracking gadgets and advanced equipment, to fight the human techniques. In order to look for even the smallest indication of movement heat signatures, they adjusted their scanners. Footsteps, vibrations, but their technology kept failing them. To expose the secret enemies that appeared to disappear into thin air, each modification just provided more information, more perplexity as they searched the area in vain. Yet this silence was unlike anything they had ever experienced, prior to becoming more conscious of the humans' capacity to blend in with their environment. The warriors discovered themselves battling the shortcomings of their own strategies in every other reality. Their strategy for overwhelming force and intimidation had been key components of warfare, but in this case, were useless against adversaries who exploited the terrain itself rather than relying solely on might. They soon discovered that their obvious formations and imposing, brilliant armor actually made them easier targets. For the first time, they stand up starkly against the inherent hues and shades of Earth's many landscapes, felt vulnerable after learning that the exact things they had previously dismissed as archaic were permitting their opponents to stay undetectable. It took more than face paint or camouflage clothes. The subtle art of disappearing and melting into the landscape seemed to be understood by humans in a way that felt nearly instinctively. Every search for them in forests ended in frustration. In cities, scanners detected the heat of animals but not that of concealed soldiers, creating reflections and echoes. It was challenging to identify the precise sites where they were imprisoned due to false positives. In a paradox, they discovered that the more they looked, the less they could find. That the human strategy involved more than just hiding. It involved knowing precisely when and where to show up and disappear, as when moving from one setting to another, the cosmic armies faced more difficulties in dense forests. Foliage produced shadows that blend almost perfectly with human silhouettes, impeding even their most determined attempts to rocky terrains. Provided natural cover, where people might lie motionless for hours, fitting in nicely with the surroundings. Every place they were in appeared to present fresh chances for people to stay hidden, turning the cosmic warriors were employed to manipulate the ecosystems, turning nature itself into an ally against the intruders. Terrains that were predictable and where their technology provided them an advantage over Earth, but also posed an unpredictable terrain that changed to accommodate its defenders, resulting in a battleground over which they were unable to control their frustration. As the days went by with no improvement, their numbers increased, but they were unable to comprehend that this was more than simply locating the adversary. It was about defeating a completely new form of warfare that went against their perceptions of power. And in order to fight, humans have to be patient, have a strong bond with their surroundings. and comprehend its delicate motions stood in sharp contrast to the galactic warriors' dependence on direct conflict and physical force. This change was so unfamiliar to them that they found themselves doubting their own strategies and finding it difficult to understand strategies that called for them to remain silent and watchful instead of all attempts to adjust to human methods have failed because they are noisy and imposing. They attempted to mimic human strategies by moving softly, but their efforts only demonstrated their inexperience with stealth. Their armor clanked and wasn't made for silence. Echoed, revealing their positions with each step, even as they attempted to move quietly. Their weapons were as potent as. They were identified as targets by lights and sounds that were released, but they were unable to match the humans' capacity to stay undetected, and their lack of subtlety was revealed by every attempt they made. Glaringly obvious that they were engaged in combat for which they were unprepared in a setting that appeared to favor the human morale among the cosmic armies started to decline in every aspect. Warriors who had previously believed they could defeat any planet began to question their own powers. They were unable to comprehend how a race they viewed as unsophisticated could so thoroughly outmaneuver them. Anger gave way to a more profound and unnerving understanding that they were up against a mastermind. The very landscapes they had before written off as insignificant had become vital in ways they hadn't expected. Tools in the hands of these people, who initially appeared to know every angle, shadow, and hiding place. Galactic commanders attempted to keep things under control by telling their soldiers to ignore the growing failures. But as time passed, even the most senior officers were unable to ignore the psychological toll that this conflict had taken. Was making an effort to replicate human strategies, but it only helped to increase their annoyance with each scan, search, and unsuccessful tactic generate outcomes that made them feel as if they were pursuing ghosts because the humans were never where they were supposed to be. For them to constantly be one step ahead and vanish before being noticed, the galactic leaders' desperation caused them to lose focus on the mission's initial goals. Began as a conquest, a show of force intended to bring another planet under their control. But it has already evolved into something very different, a battle to defeat an adversary they couldn't see, foresee, or comprehend. The humans become increasingly elusive as they pushed harder, slipping out of their grasp like nighttime shadows. As though people were circling them, driving them farther and further into perplexity and annoyance with each hour after hour, their irritation increased along with their frustration. Warriors who had formerly took great satisfaction in their ability to maintain order and discipline began to disband in a desperate attempt to find any indication of human presence. Of their leaders, who had previously exuded calm and confidence, suddenly displayed symptoms of stress, giving commands in a desperate manner that wasn't present prior to the formerly united force starting to split apart. Gang became increasingly alone as they battled to survive in a society that seems intent on concealing its defenders. Their priorities changed from taking over the planet to just living in a hostile environment. They had forgotten who they were and what had made them strong at every stage of their adaptation efforts. Galactic warriors, who have conquered many worlds, have never been caught in a fight they couldn't win. It was a sobering revelation to fight against an adversary that had perfected the arc of invisibility in its own territory. They had arrived to Earth expecting an easy victory. But instead they had faced a weapon that sliced deeper than any a species that had used the Earth, the shadows, and their own intuitions to manipulate their presumptions against them. Stay out of reach. The galactic warriors had finally encountered a foe they couldn't defeat using the spectacular strategy. Once unstoppable warriors were slowly dismantling what had once been a dominance mission, which was now becoming a psychological conflict that undermined their determination with each self-assured step the humans had brought forth when the cosmic forces used technology to obtain the upper hand. They now used silence and darkness to their advantage, and they were now enmeshed in a vicious cycle of stress, always on edge. They were acutely aware of noises that could indicate an ambush, but they couldn't get rid of the sensation that the terror among the cosmic ranks sprang from the vulnerability of being encircled by adversaries who were somehow always one step ahead. Had spread so widely that even veterans who had served on innumerable worlds were impacted, were troubled by whispers in the dark, the movement of shadows in their field of view, and the never-ending uncertainty turned every distant sound and leaf rustle into a possible threat. Transforming the surroundings into a tool of terror, it seemed as though people had turned fear into a weapon. This new strategy left the warriors with the ability to use the physical terrain as a weapon against the interstellar invaders, fighting to remain composed, and they started to lose the unity that had previously given them their invincibility. Desperate to defeat this invisible foe, they set up intricate traps in the hopes of cornering the humanity, but these initiatives just made them more vulnerable. seems to be aware of every tactic beforehand, evading capture and slipping past without a trace with each unsuccessful attempt merely. Increased the annoyance of the Galactic warriors and exacerbated the sensation of powerlessness that was permeating. They were used to being the hunters in their ranks, but now an enemy was turning them into the prey. They were unable to observe who took advantage of every square inch of the Earth's surface to exacerbate the problems that humanity faced. Learned to use the warriors' own anxieties against them in psychological warfare. Small tricks made a loud noise. All it took to send their patrols into a panic was a glimpse of movement or a shadowy figure. The warriors' reliance on sight and sound was exploited by humans, who made them question their own senses at every opportunity. Tension among the troops increased when a glimpse or distant sound became a potential threat. It seemed as though the humans realized that terror has the same ability to immobilize as any weapon, leaving the cosmic armies helpless in the fear of the unknown took root, causing cracks in the face of an adversary that only needed to stay hidden. Ranks of soldiers started to voice doubts about their leaders that would have been unimaginable in any other campaign. They wondered why their highly developed and sophisticated technology was failing them and why they couldn't confront the adversary. The warriors, who had before chuckled at Earth's simplicity, now swapped shifting words and talked in low voices at every turn. With uncomfortable looks and a growing reluctance to go, the mission had changed from one of conquest to one of survival. Exercise as they battled to resist the constant psychological strain that humans had created, so the galactic leaders tried to restore order by telling their troops to hold steady while morale declined. Must maintain concentration and rely on their training, but the once cohesive force that was renowned for fear and annoyance were causing its discipline and cohesiveness to crumble. And instructions were being questioned. Soldiers who had earlier taken joy in their duty now viewed it as a burden. After being abandoned and disciplined, they were no longer warriors on a mission because of the constant stress and the invisible danger that hovered over them. They felt defenseless, dispersed, and plagued by adversaries they couldn't see from the cosmic warriors. As if people were both everywhere and nowhere at once, a constant danger that lingered just out of sight. The warriors' nerves were frazzled by continual vigilance, and the tension became intolerable. The fear was relentlessly eating away at their self-assurance, destroying any sense of safety. It had a vicious circle of weariness and worry, with the warriors too scared to take a break yet too tired to stay vigilant. Every shadow appeared to be alive, every potentiality after being ambushed. They discovered that they were caught in a never-ending loop of fear and anxiety brought on by an adversary they had not yet. The more they attempted to recover control, the more difficult it became to fight in open combat. By manipulating their senses, the humans turned the very elements against the invaders and became Earth's defenders. And taking advantage of their flaws, the cosmic warriors who were once in control of every environment found themselves humans had incorporated the terrain into their strategies, making it hard to vanquish an environment they could not control. In order for the warriors to feel secure, they were more conscious of how little authority they actually possessed and how they were treated like outsiders in a country that had rejected them. The cosmic armies gradually and painstakingly came to understand their situation. Once confident and haughty, they were now realizing how much they had overestimated their own limitations. Human mass mastery of their own environment overrides the dismissal of them as primitive by Earth's occupants. The warriors were reduced to a dispersed, disheartened force despite having come to conquer in order to demonstrate their prowess. Incapable of resisting the tiny, constant pressure that the humans had placed on their pride, and feeling of their pride had become their undoing, preventing them from seeing how different Earth's defenders were from all other adversaries they had encountered previously. And in their last frantic efforts to reassemble, the warriors realized they had, in addition to resisting their invasion, the humans who were evading them had also used their own anxieties as a weapon against them. In every unsuccessful attempt, every scrapped idea, and every instance of an adversary who was much more knowledgeable about the battlefield than the humans were had manipulated doubt. Their familiarity with the terrain, their endurance, and their ability to accomplish what no other species had driven the galactic warriors to the brink of defeat without engaging in any direct combat. It was a humiliating experience. Epiphany that deprived them of their previous haughtiness and left them with only the stark truth of their weakness. As the galactic warriors observed the formerly arrogant ranks now teeming with doubt, they realized that this was no longer a fight for Earth, but rather a brutal warning that power is not only in technology and weapons, but also in patience, comprehending one's surroundings, and resiliency. Humanity had demonstrated to them the boundaries of their capabilities. demonstrating that even the most powerful force could be rendered powerless in the face of an adversary who understood how to use silence and terror. As Galactic, the invasion of Earth by the warriors would be viewed as an expensive lesson in the true meaning of desperate to regain power. The galaxy leaders rallied their surviving troops for a last battle. Attack, despite their superior firepower and cutting-edge technology, they were starting to understand the extent of due to their error in judgment. The humans had deprived them of their self-assurance, revealed their limitations, and turned the very things that were working against them were determined to save their mission, so they ordered a full-scale offensive, certain that the resistance would be broken by a decisive attack. Yet even as they prepared, doubt plagued their thoughts, plagued by an adversary that had so far remained unseen, elusive, and uncompromising, the once guaranteed an easy victory. The Galactic warriors had been reduced to a force that struggled to maintain focus. Lack of money or power was not the reason why every attempt to engage the human had failed, rather. It was because of humans' capacity to blend in with the environment and stay undetected. This last attack was intended to alter everything in order to compel people to come out of hiding and engage in direct conflict. Warriors advanced with weapons-primed scanners that scanned the entire terrain. However, the Galactic Master's impatience kept the hush intact, and humanity were nowhere to be seen. Used every weapon at their disposal, their spacecraft hovered overhead, illuminating the country with rays of light as the Earth units dispersed in closely spaced lines. Being sure to check all possible shadow went unchecked, but the humans managed to stay hidden thanks to their concealment and understanding of with each stride forward. The terrain proves more effective than the warriors' most advanced technology. As they saw that their last attack was failing, their irritation grew and eventually turned into silent despair. Whispers in the wind and empty land are the only outcomes, and the warriors' annoyance soon turned to fear. Then fear upon realizing that the humans had been watching them at all times. They were unable to see their opponents because it seemed as though the Earth itself had risen against them, combatants who would confront them on the battlefield. But a power that persisted and was invisible, slipping the cosmic armies had used intimidation to overpower their opponents through their fingers like shadows, adversaries with shows of strength. But these strategies were ineffective against humans because they didn't require weapons. With each other, they employed silence and patience, allowing the galactic powers to expend their own energy in futile searches. The warriors started to feel the burden of their loneliness. After their unsuccessful attempt, they were confined in a strange world. The humans had turned their backs on the Earth because they were encircled by an adversary who knew it better than they could. Knowledge of the planet into a potent weapon that changes each rock tree, and the galactic troops, who had previously defeated Shadow, now found themselves unable to comprehend or control their surroundings. They were no longer conquerors. Instead, they were humans, continued to be a persistently eerie presence, intruders blundering clumsily in a land that had rejected them. They never showed themselves, yet they are constantly near enough to make every sound frightful. Every change in the wind seemed to portend an ambush, but there was never an attack throughout this protracted period of quiet, bringing down even the most seasoned warriors, destroying their spirits. Anticipated a swift and clear victory, but they were suddenly up against an opponent they couldn't defeat in a war they couldn't understand. That humans had forced them into a defensive position by demonstrating the limitations of their own tactics. Even as they made progress, the cosmic ranks gradually but irrevocably came to the final realization. They were outclassed in terms of numbers, technology, and firepower. Useless in the face of an adversary that had perfected the skill of surviving in its own habitat, the humans had turned their understanding of the terrain into a weapon for warfare, controlling the warriors' every action without ever having direct battle. The galactic powers that had taken over innumerable planets were now every attempt they made to survive on Earth was foiled by an opponent they had initially underestimated. Once arrogant and self-assured, the galactic leaders were forced to face an unpleasant reality. Mankind had destroyed them throughout the entire campaign without ever displaying themselves or firing a shot. Destroyed by humans' capacity to stay hidden, use the environment as an ally, and stay one step ahead at all times. As the leaders turned to face their surviving troops, they saw the damage caused by this relentless hidden resistance had captured their warriors, who were now shadows of their former prowess. Ultimately, exhausted and shattered, the galactic armies were forced to humans have transformed their greatest strength, the capacity to remain invisible, into an unbreakable barrier in order to escape. It became increasingly obvious with each hour that they were intruders in a planet that was not theirs to conquer, that had no room for them, an owl land, which had risen to defend its own, had demonstrated to them that strength was a comprehension of one's environment rather than only technology or weapons. No amount of firepower could defeat their perseverance and patience as the cosmic warriors withdrew. A warning that even the most highly developed armies may be outwitted by those who understood the land, that recognized the silent strength of endurance and quiet. The people who had considered feeble and archaic have humbled a once unstoppable force by using their understanding of Earth. When the warriors returned to their ships, their self-confidence destroyed the failed goal they had come to accomplish. Yet they departed in retreat, having been permanently impacted by the encounter with an adversary who had taught them the real meaning of swift, silent, and characterized by a sense of loss. The cosmic retreat humans, who never once had to confront forces that had earlier regarded themselves as superior to all other creatures, had humbled by defending itself without using any weapons. Earth has directly challenged the conceit of the galactic powers. They had been vanquished by a species that understood how to vanish, how to blend in so well that they were no longer able to tell themselves apart from the land. By using quiet as a shield was a reminder of the strength within that the galactic armies would take back to their home worlds. Rose, the last of their ships, demonstrates patience and the simple act of knowing when to stay hidden. The galactic warriors gazed back at the planet they ultimately failed to conquer as they soared into the skies. It was more than just a group of landscapes. It was a living thing protected by individuals who knew how to make every shadow shine. Every breath of wind turns into a benefit that the galactic powers used to fear. Humans had demonstrated to them that occasionally, an enemy they couldn't even see had brought the galaxy to its knees. The greatest triumphs are achieved not by force but rather by a silent, unflinching fortitude that even the most modern technology was unable to.